All right. Well, good morning, everybody. It
Good
is
morning.
Wednesday, so I'm glad you're here today. Boy, it's lonely here at school without students. So quiet and creepy in the classroom. It's all dark in there, and the chairs are up on the tables. And
Wow.
I miss you guys when you're not here because it's just too quiet. There's
Oh,
not very
I
much
wish,
excitement. You guys,
yeah, I wish we came every day.
yeah, you guys bring all the excitement. So anyway, we're happy when you're here. But well, okay. Well, has anybody got anything we need to talk about before we get moving here? Everything okay?
Yeah.
Assignments going good and everything's like it should be? Okay. All right. Well, there's Jesus. Okay. Well, I'm gonna put I've got two PowerPoints for us today. So we're gonna talk about this one. Oopsie, that was not what I wanted to do. I want to do this one.
Oh, that looks good.
I know. I love the chocolate. Right. Just need that with that big old cup of coffee this morning and be happy with that. So we're getting ready to move into the different terminology, the things whenever you read a recipe, it has some specific wording in it that determines what you're going to do to that particular product, and those things can affect the outcome of the product. And so knowing some terminologies and basic kind of preparation skills will help you have a better
It smells.
better end result. Okay, so here we go with basic preparations. So remember we talked about that word mise en place the other day. You guys remember? Do you guys remember what that was? Jalissa, do you remember what mise en place means?
Was it a type of like cutting or something?
I can just barely hear you, Jalissa.
Like a type of cutting?
A type of cutting?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it's things having to do with preparation or getting ready to cook. Mise en place, remember, is a French term that means everything in its place. Okay, and it means all that gathering up of stuff and the prepping of everything that we can do before we're getting ready to cook, and it just kind of helps us be more organized and speed things along. Okay, so some part of that has to do with getting the products into the manner in which we're going to use them. For instance, like egg whites, like this coming class session, we are one of the things we're going to do is make angel food cake, and that involves a lot of egg cracking and a lot of egg separating and a lot of whipping of egg whites. And so so that takes a little pre-planning to get all that done. So that's a form of basic preparation. Okay, so here's some other things. Clarifying butter. You guys ever done that before? So that's just real butter, not margarine, but real butter. You know, it's made from dairy, and we'll talk about it here in a minute. But you have to remove the milk solids from the butter, and it raises that scorch temp so that you can saute or apply a little bit more heat to butter without it scorching. And there's some other uses for it too, which we'll talk about. But all of these things in here are different things that we can do that we're going to talk about here in a minute that we want to get done beforehand. Okay. So here's our clarifying butter. Anybody like to eat at Red Lobster? You guys ever eaten there before? That's some good stuff, isn't it? So well, if you ever get the seafood platter, you'll get a little container of butter that comes out with your seafood usually, and that is drawn butter. It's also clarified butter is what it basically is. Okay, and it just has had those milk solids removed. We've just heated it at a fairly low temperature, and that milk solid kind of floats to the top. and has like a white foam, and we just kind of spoon that off. So we had that beautiful golden butter, and we use it for some things. We can use it, like I said, for sauteing things, and again for this drawn butter. There's some baking applications also, but it's nice stuff. Okay, and there's the process for that. And so I'll put this slideshow on Moodle so that you can go back and look at it. But there's a process for clarifying butter. Okay, so separating eggs, that's a pretty important deal, because the fat that is in an egg is found in the yolk. And if you're trying to whip the whites, any bit of fat will deflate your egg whites. And so you want to make sure when you're cracking eggs that you don't get yolk in the whites, or they won't be as fluffy. And so we do that with what we call the 3-bowl method. And so we crack our egg over the bowl and separate out the white and the yolk. And then if we like what we see, we can pour the yolk in one bowl and the white in the other bowl. So we're always cracking over an empty bowl, and we're keeping what we're using separate. So in case we happen to break a yolk, we can use that for another purpose, and we don't have that mixed in our white that we're trying to keep fat free. Okay, so and we'll practice this whenever we do our egg yolks for our angel food cake. In angel food cake, you know, what's the leavening or the thing that makes angel food cake rise? Do you know? Anybody? Jesus, do you know?
No.
Okay. So Cindy, do you know?
Is it baking powder?
Well, there are a few recipes that you might have cream of tartar.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and that might be what you're thinking. But basically, the leavening in angel food cake is the egg whites themselves, because they puff and put off steam, and that's what causes it to rise. But that cream of tartar is actually kind of a stabilizer that helps it, once it puffs, it helps it hold, it helps it set up. And so, but that's an interesting process, because if you don't get your egg whites just right, your cake won't rise. So, and there's a fine line between overbeaten eggs and underbeaten eggs, and so you have to know when to stop or how far to go to get that optimum result in your angel food cake. So we'll have fun with that in a day or two. Okay, so here's whipping eggs. Another thing that can happen if you go too far away, that you know that, which, I mean, if you go too far, it's kind of the point of no return, but they'll look kind of gray. And they will, when you look at the surface of the bowl, they'll be kind of cracked looking as opposed to creamy looking. And that's how you know you've gone too far, but there's no going back. Once you go too far, you have to start over. So the under whipped eggs they won't hold a peak. And there's soft peak and stiff peak, and we'll talk about that. And we'll want, for this application, we'll want fairly stiff peak. Okay. All right. And whipping cream. Who likes whipped cream on top of pie or berries or strawberry shortcake? Oh yeah, or just off the spoon, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So and there's a difference between, you guys know what Cool Whip is, right? The kind you buy in the frozen, and that's an entirely different thing than whipping cream. So that's kind of like Cool Whip's kind of like margarine. It tastes good, but it's not the real deal. And so whipping cream is cream that comes from a cow, and you buy it in the refrigerated section where the milk is, and then you whip it, and you add some sugar and some vanilla, and it becomes this glorious, creamy, yummy goodness that you want to slather on everything. So, but it has kind of that same process of whipping that you would with egg whites, except with this, if you go too far, what do you get?
Butter.
Butter, exactly. So, and I don't know, I mean, if you had sugary butter, I don't know, cake maybe. You could do something with it, but goodness sake. But yeah, you don't want to go too far with this, because then you'll have butter. All right. So a Bon Marie, who's made cheesecake at home, like a baked in the oven kind of cheesecake? Oh man, I love making that. Or things like cream caramel, or things like oh gosh, what's that called? Creme brulee.
Mm.
Ah, so good. And those are kind of a custard egg based, and they're fairly creamy. And the way you keep that from drying out and from cracking is to do it in what we call a Bon Marie, or do it in a water bath. And that is done with just a pan in the oven, and you put boiling water in that pan, and then set your cooking vessel down in that pan. And I like to cover mine too, because it kind of allows it to steam a little bit, and it seems to me like it makes a more tender custard that way, and it kind of steams. And then if you want it to be slightly browned on top, you can, the last few minutes, you can pull that cover off and let it brown just a little bit. But I like how it makes that creamy texture.
Mm.
All right. Here's another one. Parchment liners. So these things work really good for baking for cakes that you want to turn out of the pan, like if you're making the round birthday cakes, or if you are making like an upside down cake, like something that you need to be sure that it will release. And so the parchment liners, if they're round, you can cut them. It's almost like folding up a paper airplane, and then you'll cut them and then have your round piece of parchment that you'll put inside your pan, so it will help it release better. And we'll practice doing that too. We'll make some cakes and I'll let you use that, and it sure makes things a lot nicer. Okay, and substitutions. Have you ever got going and realized you didn't have an egg, or didn't have oil, or didn't have something that you needed? So there's lots of things that you can do to substitute things for, and sometimes you'll affect the outcome, and sometimes you won't. Is the deal. So, and sometimes some really happy things can happen. You come up with some type of a new recipe, which is fun, but sometimes it can be disastrous too. So you know, sometimes you just have to try and see what happens. So anyway, but I've got a substitution handout that I'll give you on your next in-person day, which might be good when you need something in a pinch. Okay. All right, so that's the end of that little show. And so here's another one that I wanted to talk to you about today. And this one is just some basic culinary terms. So again, whenever you're reading the recipe, if it says things like to beat, so whenever you say beat, usually to me that means use the mixer. If it says I don't know, until tender, so that's usually whenever you are browning something or sauteing something on the stove top, and so it kind of gives you a hint as to what that process should look like at the end. Okay, so do you guys know this word, al dente?
Mm-hmm.
So it literally means to the tooth, to the tooth. And so when you cook pasta, it shouldn't be just cooked to mush. It should have a little bit of a texture to it when you bite into it. It should be firm but not crunchy, but should have a little bit of a texture to it. So, and we cook vegetables a lot of times this way too. We want to make sure, because you know, if you cook them too long, they just kind of disintegrate, right? Mm-hmm. And so we want things to have a nice texture. Okay, so here is beet. And so when you see that, that means this paddle on the mixer, okay, on the electric mixer. All right, and to beat something, you're going over and over it fairly quickly, and usually it'll have an amount of time or in the recipe, or it will say or until smooth, or it gives you some kind of direction how long you should keep doing that. Okay, brown. So we like to brown our food. It gives it a little bit more eye appeal. Things like meat, or even like think about like a grilled cheese sandwich. How much prettier it looks when you get a little bit of brown on the bread there. And so it adds a little bit of flavor, and it also adds some eye appeal. And we brown things very often on the cooktop, but you know, you could brown things in your oven also. All right, butterfly. Who likes pork chops? Like stuffed pork chops? Have you ever fixed those before? Oh man, I have a recipe for it is like a pork sausage stuffed pork chop that is so good. It's like one of my favorite things to make. But butterfly, what you're doing actually is taking a thicker cut of meat and either making a pocket or cutting it, but not cutting quite through the outside so that you can lay it open. And you can do two things with this. One is you can stuff it and then fold it back over, and it makes just like this glorious meat sandwich. Or it also helps with the cooking process. If you wanted to cook these maybe on the grill, and a big old, great big thick pork chop would take a long time to cook, but you could butterfly this and cook it a little quicker. So those are some other things you could do. Okay, caramelized. So if you hear that word, that means that we're browning it, but we're also, that process of caramelization takes a while. So things like making French onion soup, for instance, have you guys done that before? Excuse me. Well, making the onions to get to that caramelized state takes quite a while. But what it does is it takes away that heat or that sulfury taste of the onion, and it brings out that natural sugar. And so there's a natural kind of a sweetness that is that you can detect with the onions once they're cooked like that. So it takes a while, but it is lovely once it happens. Okay, so chilling things. So sometimes you'll see things like like a frosting, where you'll want to cool it down before you add it, because otherwise you'll melt the butter and then you'll have a soupy mess. Some other things they may want you to chill, whether it's for storage, you know, if you want to cool it down and then put it in the refrigerator. Things want you to chill it down before you mix other things together. Okay, creaming. So I think every cookie recipe in the world starts with creaming together the sugar and the butter, right? Yes. And so creaming usually has to do with either shortening, like shortening like Crisco, or butter or margarine, depending on what you're using. And very oftentimes it'll be sugar. But what you're doing is incorporating that sugar into that fat until it almost dissolves. And that's what makes a nice texture for your baked goods. So you'll see that really often in baking. Okay, drain. So sometimes you'll see, like on soup, for instance, if you, it'll say either drain the vegetable or drain the beans that you're going to put in your soup. Of course, with pasta, you want to drain off that. Sometimes on pasta, they'll want you to save back some of the water to add into your final dish to kind of tighten it up a little bit, but because of the starch. But there's a lot of good recipes that'll include that. And you'll use that either a colander or some type of a handheld strainer. Depends on how much stuff you're working with. Okay, dredge. Who likes to make fried chicken or chicken fried steak or catfish? Okay, so dredging usually has to do with some type of a liquid. Oftentimes it's egg, or it might be some type of dairy product, and then you dredge it into things like flour or cornmeal or breadcrumbs. It can be all kinds of stuff. So, but that's and you can put all kinds of flavorings in the dry stuff. Pretty good, pretty good. And here's your egg wash, and a lot of baked goods have egg wash on top, and what that does is it makes it have a pretty sheen on top, and it helps it to brown nicely. So things like bread and things like pretzels and things like biscuits, things like scones. I'm making myself hungry here. All of those things have that yummy egg wash that just gives things a pretty color. And sometimes you'll use the whole egg, and sometimes it'll just be the white. Or in the case yesterday, I had a student that was making pretzels, and they used the yolk with water. So, I mean, it could be the whole egg or whatever part of the egg. Sometimes it's water, and sometimes it's milk. It just depends on what your recipe says. Okay. All right, to fold. So very gently, you're folding in things like, for instance, our angel food cake that we've been talking about. You know, we're gonna work really hard to get those egg whites fluffed up nice and big, but we've got to add flour to it, because remember, flour is the thing that gives it the texture that we need. And if we just dumped all that flour in all at once, it would crush our egg whites, wouldn't it? It would deflate them. And that's not what we want. So we're going to very gently add in 2 or 3 parts our dry ingredients into our egg whites, and we'll use a folding motion with a rubber scraper. And that folding motion is down the side of the bowl and then just up and around the side of the bowl and up really gently. And it's okay to leave some dry streaks in your egg whites. And you'll do this with cream, and you'll do it with several things, but the idea is that you're not deflating whatever it is that you've fluffed up. And so, and this is where we get the egg whites right, but this is where a lot of cooks kind of get themselves into trouble, is because they overmix, because they feel like everything has to be all mixed in there. But it's okay to have some dry ingredients still exposed. But there's you don't want to have too much, but it's okay to have some streaks running through there. Okay. All right, and then garnish. So it makes a plate so pretty when you can add a little something to it, just to kind of wamp it up a little bit. And usually on a garnish, I think it should be related to what it is that you're eating. So, I mean, it's kind of strange to have, you know, a steak and a baked potato and a nice green vegetable, and then have a strawberry for the garnish. It doesn't make sense, does it? No. So it needs to go with the food, and so remember that in the future. But things, you know, fruit and chocolate go really well together. And think about colors. You know, on a plate, you know, a steak is brown, and a baked potato is brown. And so what can you do to liven that up a little bit? So a green vegetable is beautiful. Things like candied carrots would be beautiful. A little sprinkling of parsley, maybe chopped parsley, but those kind of things tend to, you know, give a lot more eye appeal to your plate. Remember, people eat with their eyes first. And remember the saying, it looks good. And that's what, you know, the first attracts you to it is it looks good. And, you know, if it doesn't look good, you're maybe less apt to try it. And so it needs to look pretty on the plate to encourage people to want to try it. Okay. All right, so greasing something, grease the pan. Sometimes you can spray it with some pan spray. Sometimes it's butter, sometimes it's Crisco. But the idea is we're trying to keep food from sticking to something. You can even use pan, like if you're making an omelet on the flat top griddle, you can give that a squirt and it works really nicely on that too. So the pan, a lot of it is made for high temp, for sauteing and cooking on griddles, and so you just have to read on your particular can to make sure that it's suited for high temp, but it's pretty handy stuff. Okay, and here's that word again, that mise en place, and that's assembling everything, getting it all ready for our recipe, all that slicing and dicing we've been learning about. Okay, pare, like the paring knife that we were talking about, that is to cut off a very thin layer, and sometimes it has to do with the peel. Sometimes it's just slicing them thinly, okay? But things like pies and things like apple crisps and things like that, you know, if you leave too big of pieces, then they don't cook quite all the way through in the time that you have it in the oven. And so you want to make sure that you're slicing them consistently and thin enough that they're going to cook in the set amount of time. And here's preheat. And this is important too on different types of baked goods. If you don't preheat your oven before you put your baked good in the oven, you will not get a good end result, because a lot of ovens take a long time to reheat or to preheat, excuse me. Things that cook for more than an hour, it really doesn't matter. But things that are less than an hour, especially things like cookies that are, you know, in and out within, you know, 10 or 12 minutes, really have to have that preheated oven. So that's part of that mise en place process. So that first thing you do when you go in the kitchen, turn the oven on, okay? And then some of those other processes, you know, make sure you have all the ingredients. If you're going to cook pasta, you're putting a pot of water on to boil. So those things that we know that we're going to need that may take us a little while, if we wait till the very minute we need it, then we don't have it ready. But there's stuff that can be happening simultaneously while we're doing other stuff, and that preheating of the oven is one of those things. It doesn't need us to stand over it for it to happen. Okay, and then there's this word scoring, and that's to make marks into the top of food. So sometimes you'll see it like on loaves of bread before it's baked. You'll see they've used either a sharp knife or a razor blade and have cut the top of it, and that's to keep it from tearing whenever it puffs in the oven, and just makes a prettier top. You may see it on your Easter ham, where you slice the top of it a little bit, and again, it's keeping that from, whenever it expands, it's keeping it from tearing, and it just makes a prettier presentation. So you may even see things in a more decorative nature, like up here at the top, they're scoring vegetables just to make them pretty. So that's another way that might be used. So, oh, and another way I was thinking of, ribs, for instance, they do have some connective tissue on the back of them, and when you get ready to cook those, you have to pull that connective tissue off. But another way that I've noticed that restaurants do it, that cook lots and lots of ribs, instead of pulling that tissue off, they just score it with a knife. And just kind of hatch it, and that way it just kind of pulls away. And that's another way that you could, what would tenderize, I guess, the ribs like that. Okay, sifting. So that angel food cake we're going to make requires quite a bit of sifting, because we're incorporating air into our ingredients. It also captures lumpy things like powdered sugar, for instance. If you don't sift your powdered sugar whenever you're putting it on top of something, it could be lumpy and it just won't be as pretty. So it just, things like whole wheat or things that have a large grain to it, though, don't really sift very well. And I've noticed things like our kosher salt, for instance, gets caught in the sifter because it's a bigger flake. And so with baking, a lot of times if you'll use just the regular salt as opposed to the kosher salt, it'll go through your sifter better. but definitely does give a smoother consistency. It also incorporates air. So if you were to measure sifted flour and not sifted flour, you would have, you know, the volume would probably be the same, but if you actually measured it by weight, the sifted flour would be less because you've incorporated more air into that. And so, which would make a difference in your baked goods. They would be much lighter if they have less flour. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. All right, and here's strain, which is similar to drain. Okay, and sweat. So a lot of times you'll see, for instance, stew recipes or different kinds of soup recipes that might call for have you sweat the vegetables as opposed to saute the vegetables. You know, saute literally means to jump. And on a saute, you are moving things around quite quickly in a pan. When you sweat, you have the same ingredients, but you have a lid on it, and you're keeping that moisture from those vegetables in that pot, and that imparts quite a bit of flavor to whatever it is that you're cooking. So it's a different process, same vegetables, but it's covered, and you're keeping that moisture in the pan as opposed to trying to brown them. Okay, and there's whip. We just talked about that. All right, the end. Okay, so those are your 2 slideshows for today, and we're going to be practicing these things. Tomorrow we're going to make bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwiches. And so, yeah, yum. And we're going to use the meat slicer. Remember, I told you how I like to use that for a lot of things. And so for our tomatoes, they make beautiful tomato slices. And our BLT has a little bit of, it has, of course, has bacon, but we also are going to put turkey on it. So we use the meat slicer for that. But I want you guys to get used to using some of that big equipment that we have in the kitchen and some of our processes, like baking bacon as opposed to frying it in a skillet. And you can get much more done quicker, and you have a nice flat product that works really nice in a sandwich. Okay, so that'll be for tomorrow, and that's about it for today. Do you guys have any questions or anything you want to know? All right, well, I will get all of this posted. I don't think I have your Moodle assignments up for this section yet, but I'll get that on either later today or tomorrow, so you'll have it. So we'll get moving on these processes and using some of that equipment in the kitchen. Okay?
Okay.
All right. You guys have a fantastic Wednesday, and let me know if I can help you with anything, and we will see you very soon. All right?
Okay.
Take care,
All right.
everybody.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.